our neighbours or our region. And it's certainly not a world we want for our children. The well-motivated, altruistic ambition of our international institutions has opened the door, unwittingly, to this threat. Just as our open markets and liberal democracies have enabled hostile influence and interference to penetrate our own societies and economies. Now, we're right to aspire and have open economies. However, the hope that such inclusion and accommodation would lead to some reform or moderation of these autocratic regimes, or assist us more broadly in tackling big global economic and environmental challenges, well, that hope has been disappointed. As Prime Minister, I've been warning about this for years, including at the Lowy Institute. Our Liberal Nationals government has been clear-eyed on these threats. We have taken strong, brave and world-leading action in response. We have taken the initiative to bolster our own resilience, to call out the threat and to rally like-mindeds to address what is taking place right in front of us in plain sight. We have been criticised for our stand, including in our own country, and indeed we have been targeted by those we have criticised. But I'm pleased we have been prepared to stand our ground, because if not us, then who? Would we be expecting others to do it on Australia's behalf to protect our interests? I certainly do not believe Australians want such timidity and resignation from their leaders. None of us want conflict. We want peace, we want stability, but nor do we want the very world order that underpins our freedoms to be eroded for the fear of giving offence, in some vain hope that such concessions would ameliorate the determination of those who seek to intimidate and coerce us. Events are now lifting the veil, I believe. Perhaps the scales are beginning to fall from the world's eyes also, at least I hope so. And so Australia faces its most difficult and significant and most dangerous security environment in 80 years. This is where I'd really like to address my remarks today. Firstly, the crisis in Europe and the contribution Australia is making, and the broader challenge to world order and Australia's national security response, focusing especially on our own region, the Indo-Pacific. To the war in Europe, Russia's invasion of Ukraine is a gross violation of international law and the UN Charter. Russia's actions have been and should be condemned by all members of the international community. We expect Russia to continue, though, its brutal attacks, including bombarding residential areas, even nuclear facilities, with scant regard for civilian casualties or the broader catastrophic impact. This is what autocrats do. It is not the product of some sudden madness or a failure of earlier diplomacy to resolve just grievances. These are the bloody and violent acts of an autocrat determined to impose his will on others, in the contrived self-justification of realising some nationalistic destiny. And we've seen all this before. Everything points to a bloody and protracted conflict. More than 1.5 million people have already fled Ukraine, and we fear this is only the beginning of an unfolding and terrible humanitarian catastrophe. As I remarked to President Zelenskyy just on Saturday evening, Australia will continue to stand with the brave people of Ukraine. And we are working with our allies and partners to supplement Ukraine's military defences. Last Tuesday, I announced around $70 million in defensive military assistance and non-lethal military equipment and medical supplies to support the defence of Ukraine. Our missiles are on the ground now. If there is further effective support we can provide to assist Ukraine's efforts, we will. Every day Ukraine resists is a further day of humiliation for President Putin and imposes a heavy price on his illegal, reckless and callous acts of aggression. So yes, we have offered our prayers, but in Australia, we have also sent our ammunition. In addition, Australia is helping those rendered homeless or vulnerable by Putin's war machine, with $35 million in humanitarian assistance for urgent needs, especially for those displaced in a neighbouring country. Now, this was a special focus of my discussions last week at the Quad, as well with German Chancellor Scholz and Polish Prime Minister Morawiecki. Australia's assistance will deliver life-saving services and supplies, including shelter, water, food and medical care. Since the crisis began less than 2 weeks ago, We have fast-tracked the approval of some 1,700 visas and have begun preparations to address likely demands on our humanitarian and broader migration program. Now, this may include a rerun of the successful temporary safe haven program we ran for the Kosovars some years ago. And in my discussions with European leaders, it is their prevailing expectation, though, that rather than long-term resettlement, those who have been displaced will want to return to their home in Ukraine. Australia is working with other countries to ensure that Putin's Russia pays the maximum possible economic price for this brutal war of aggression. This is important because we know there are powerful actors in our region who are watching closely, looking for signs of weakness and division within the West. Unprecedented economic and financial sanctions are now humbling and biting hard on the world's 11th biggest economy. A significant portion of Russia's foreign exchange reserves has been frozen, and the Russian economy is increasingly cut off from Western financial markets. Major multinational companies such as BP and Shell are selling their Russian assets. Australia's superannuation funds are divesting those assets. Australia has imposed targeted financial sanctions on 21 entities, including 11 Russian financial institutions, and that includes the Central Bank of Russia. We have also imposed financial sanctions and travel bans on 392 individuals. That includes President Putin, Foreign Minister Lavrov, and all the permanent members of Russia's Security Council. This is in addition to our sanctions on 8 oligarchs, 339 members of the Russian parliament, and key figures in the Belarusian government and military. I want to particularly recognise actions taken against Russia by countries such as Japan and South Korea and Singapore, a welcome testimony in our own region to international solidarity. It would be folly to venture predictions on the wider fallout from Mr. Putin's war at this point. Certain early conclusions, though, can be drawn. Firstly, Europe has had a major wake-up call, strategically and economically. Australia welcomes signs of a more concerted, tough-minded European approach to autocrat adventurism. Germany supplying Ukraine with anti-tank weapons and Stinger missiles and moving immediately to increase defence spending to 2% of GDP. I know Denmark had made the same announcement. Sweden and Finland, long committed to military non-alignment, now contemplating joining NATO and also taking part in all NATO consultations about the crisis and sending weapons to Ukraine. The EU finding weapons for Ukraine, and even Switzerland moving from its traditional position of neutrality. Secondly, the global system of independent commerce and finance, built largely under American leadership over the past 70 years, remains an enormously powerful force not to be underestimated. This should give us renewed confidence to assert that those who wish to overturn the global order through violence need to think again. And thirdly, political will matters. It's been humbling to witness the courage and moral clarity of President Zelensky's inspiring leadership of his country, and it was a privilege to be able to commend him for that in our conversation just a few days ago. On behalf of all Australians, there is a wider lesson here for Western liberal democracies as we come face to face with brutal autocratic aggression and coercion, and that is we must stand together. We cannot afford the pettiness of small differences to infect our relations and our long-term cooperation. We have to get over these, and fast. Our adversaries will ruthlessly look to exploit this. What unites us as Western liberal democracies is far greater and far more enduring than what divides us. So stand together we must, resolute, against aggression and coercion wherever it occurs. The strategic, political, economic and social implications of this crisis will of course be deeply felt within Europe, but will inevitably stretch to the Indo-Pacific, which is the next point I wanted to address. This was the topic of our discussion at the Quad Leaders meeting the other night. This war of choice by Mr. Putin is a reminder that although Australia's focus is the Indo-Pacific, events elsewhere can affect our regional security. The Indo-Pacific remains at the centre of global geostrategic competition. Australia is an Indo-Pacific nation. The future of the Indo-Pacific is our future. Threats in our region are proliferating from both state and non-state actors. Militarisation is expanding and evolving rapidly. The spectre from terrorism and all forms of violent extremism endures. The challenge from more surreptitious malign activities, espionage, disinformation, cyber attacks, foreign interference and economic coercion, it's mounting daily. We're seeing increasing resort in our region to grey area tactics, where the boundary between legitimate and hostile activity is deliberately blurred. And the rise of so-called hybrid warfare that has stripped away the old boundaries that once separated the realms of defence, foreign policy, trade and investment, communications and other areas reaching deep into our domestic security. Australia seeks to work with all countries to ensure a peaceful, stable and prosperous region. However, we're not naive and nor can we be. The challenges we face continue to mount. They require us to increase our resilience, expand our capabilities and harden our defences. Liberal Nationals government that I lead is taking decisive action.
That was Australian Prime Minister Scott Morrison condemning the Russian invasion of Ukraine, calling for more security in that country. Now, Ukraine's Vinnytsia International Airport was nothing but rubble after being hit by back-to-back airstrikes, which Ukraine claims to be launched by Russia. We take a look at how the airport was bombed.
On Sunday, the Vinnytsia International Airport was left completely destroyed after it was struck back-to-back by missiles. Zelenskyy added that 8 Russian missiles hit the Vinnytsia Airport in southwest of Kyiv, reducing it to dust.
Мені доповіли про ракетний удар по Вінниці, 8 ракет проти нашого міста, проти нашої мирної, доброї Вінниці, яка ніколи не загрожувала Росії жодним чином. Ракетний удар, жорсткий, цинічний, повністю зруйнований аеропорт.
Additionally, Ukraine's Minister of Foreign Affairs Dmytro Kuleba took to Twitter condemning Russia for its back-to-back barbaric attacks against Ukraine.
Сотні полонених, серед них і пілоти літаків, які бомбили наші міста, наших мирних людей. Ми почули їхні свідчення. Ми побачили документи, мапи, плани не вчорашнього дня. Це не імпровізація, це війна. Вони готували це вторгнення саме так, жорстоко, цинічно, завідомо з порушенням правил війни.
Zelenskyy demanded support from the NATO and the West as Ukraine continues to burn in the flames of war. Agency report, Republic TV.
Now, the United Nations nuclear watchdog, IAEA, has raised concerns over Russia's takeover of the nuclear plant in Zaporizhzhia. Now, the watchdog had said that Ukraine's nuclear regulator has complained that it is having issues communicating with the staff of the nuclear plant. Here's more in this report.
Ukraine has reportedly informed the International Atomic Energy Agency that the Zaporizhzhia nuclear power plant is now under orders from the commander of the Russian forces. Ukraine reports that any action of plant management, including measures related to the technical operation of the 6 reactor units, requires prior approval by the Russian commander now. Ukraine has also reported that the Russian forces at the site have switched off some mobile networks and the internet so that reliable information from the site cannot be obtained through the normal channels of communication. This has been confirmed by Ukraine's nuclear regulator, which informed the IAEA about the same. The regulator said that operational teams at the plant were now rotating in 3 shifts. But there were problems with availability and supply of food, which was having a negative impact on staff morale. The regulator also reported that it was facing problems communicating with personnel at the Chernobyl nuclear power plant, which at the moment was only possible with emails. In another concerning development, communications have also been lost with all enterprises and institutions in the port city of Mariupol that use category 1 to 3 radiation sources. Mariupol is the city where evacuation attempts failed for a second time. Meanwhile, the fire following Russian shelling on Zaporizhzhia nuclear power plant raised serious concerns, which faded following reports that safety of the unit was not affected. Agency Report, Republic TV.